Despite the fact that the Nintendo Switch very well may be even more popular than my buddy Lonnie down at the Boone County Clerk, pretty much everybody agrees that the online service sucks horse butter. That's basically because the subpar online play is being held hostage, with the ransom being that we rent a bunch of NES and Super Nintendo games from 30 years ago. However, even though there are plenty of all-time classics included in the lineup as it is, there's still plenty of must-haves that are just damn near impossible to add to the service, whether it be due to there not being an English translation available, censorship issues, or legal bullshit that have to be dealt with. What games am I referring to, you ask? Well, sit back in your dad's muskiest chair and allow me, YouTube's champion of fun, CameronAllOneWord, to tell you the 9 greatest Super Nintendo games that are never going to come to the Switch's online service. It's not even the mic I'm actually using right now.
Number 9. Turtles in Time. This right here is easily the greatest beat-em-up on the Super Nintendo, and possibly the greatest beat-em-up of all time. Sadly though, it's probably never going to come to the Switch's online service thanks to all the legal doo-doo involved. However, Turtles in Time is still probably the most likely licensed Super Nintendo game that could even possibly come to the Switch, aside from the LucasArts games that were somehow able to come to the Wii's Virtual Console. I mean, this game was never on the Virtual Console before, but the first and worst Turtles game on the NES was somehow able to make the cut for some reason, so there is still a chance that the Turtles game everybody actually wants could come to the service someday. If anything, though, I'm sure the arcade version would probably be sold as a standalone title on the eShop, which I'd honestly prefer anyway, especially since I have one of those arcade sticks that I always want to use but never get around to. Still, though, I wouldn't complain if we got the Super Nintendo version, though. Number 8. Saturday Night Slam Masters. Being a wrestling fan in the early 90s was pretty rough, because not only did we have to endure turkeys hatching from eggs, RoboCop doing a run-in, and stormtroopers falling through walls, but the overpriced video games really weren't all that much better. The saving grace, however, was Capcom's Saturday Night Slam Masters. Since the game didn't have any licensed wrestlers that could trick kids into buying it, Capcom actually had to try to make the game fun, and by God did they ever. There isn't really all that much variety in the types of matches you could have, but the gameplay's pretty solid, the entrances are ahead of their time as far as wrestling games are concerned, and the characters are all pretty over the top and fun, especially Mike Hagar from Final Fight, whose wrestling gimmick's an ex-dentist slash burn victim slash necrophiliac turned mayor. If you're not playing with friends, and this game's really not all that fun for too long. In fact, other fighting games as a whole are far better, which is probably why this game never really gets talked about all that much these days. Well, you know that, and there were much better sequels that weren't on the Super Nintendo. Still though, if you want a different kind of fighting game on the superior Nintendo system of entertainment, then this is definitely worth checking out, especially if you're a fan of wrestling. Sadly though, we're probably never going to see this game again, seeing as Capcom's been ignoring it since 1994. Number 7. Firemen. This game would have been a lot higher on the list if it weren't so short and supported 2 players, and there's really not a whole lot to say here since it's pretty self-explanatory based on the gameplay footage alone. You play as a couple of hunks and put fires out. Little to no fuss, little to no muss. The graphics are nice, the gameplay's satisfying, the music's neat, the story overachieves for what it is, and for some reason this never came out in North America despite already being translated into English. Unfortunately, the company who made this game, Human Entertainment, went out of business due to a fire, ironically enough.
No, they didn't.
No, they didn't. But you can imagine what it'd be like if they did, right? Huh?
Okay, so there wasn't a fire, but the company did go out of business though, and even the manager of my local Radio Shack has no idea who owns the rights to this game these days. And since nobody seems to know who to ask, this hidden gem's probably not going to come to the Switch's Super Nintendo library anytime soon. I'm just glad that ROM preservation and the internet saved this game from being cremated. Number 6. True Lies. This game actually plays a little bit like Firemen, but instead of putting fires out, you're killing butthole terrorists as Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is as classic as it gets. And don't be fooled by the LJN logo. Much like the movie, this game's incredibly underrated if you ask me. There's tons of cool weapons, the campaign's got a chunky length to it, there's plenty of gore for a Super Nintendo game, but it's also fairly difficult as well, or at least it was when I was a dumbass little kid with smelly hands anyway. Much like Firemen though, not having a 2-player mode is a huge missed opportunity, which is why Zombies Ate My Neighbors will always be the better game. I'm sure it'd be too expensive for Nintendo to secure the rights to this game, but because I love it so much, I'm gonna pull a few strings here and there and get Arnold Schwarzenegger himself to okay the project so I can get this off the list later on.
I know you're probably thinking, why would Arnold ever do that for some random guy on YouTube, but take a look at this right here.
Well, first of all, because I'm a good friend of Cameron, and I admire him, and also we have done 3 movies together.
Number 5. Clock Tower. This game probably wouldn't be very popular for most people, but the Super Nintendo didn't really have too many horror games on it. But if you can get past the awkward point-and-click controls that don't hold up well at all these days, then this game's actually pretty damn scary. You might argue that the dated controls are actually why it's so scary in the first place, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, but for historical purposes, I think it'd be pretty cool if gamers outside of Japan can give this one a shot. The game was made by the same people who made the Firemen game, which, as I mentioned earlier, went out of business, but it did pop up on the Wii's Virtual Console in Japan, probably because it was originally published by a company called Sunset. Sadly, though, the game was never officially translated into English, and for whatever reason, publishers are usually pretty weird about using fan translations. Plus, given that most Western gamers don't know, therefore don't care about this game, it's almost certainly never going to come to the above-average-sized end's little hybrid that could. Number 4. Final Fantasy V. Given how stingy Square can be, it's pretty doubtful that any Final Fantasy games are going to come to the Switch's online gimmick. But even if 4 and 6 do, the 5th game was never released outside of Japan, at least not on the Super Nintendo anyway, so I'm pretty sure Square's not going to bother to localize it now. I know it was already translated for the Game Boy Advance and everything could just be copy and pasted over, but even though there is an official translation ready to go, I doubt that much effort would be put into giving us the Super Nintendo version essentially for free. There's certainly other Japanese exclusive RPGs that Square's too lazy to translate as well, so I suppose he could add those here too, but I just thought I'd give Final Fantasy V the spotlight for a hot second. Number 3. Goof Troop. I'd have included all the Disney games on the Super Nintendo into one entry since there are some other goodies aside from this one, but to me, Goof Troop goes above and beyond to where it kind of makes the other Disney games on the Super Nintendo look like a bunch of geeks. Despite the fact that Goof Troop's a really good game though, somebody with some kind of power really doesn't want it to see the light of day again along with all the other Disney games from the same era that ended up on the Switch. And you know what, I think that's a damn shame because the template Goof Troop laid out would eventually become the 4 Sword Zelda games. Even though it isn't an official Zelda game, I still kind of consider it to be a spiritual predecessor. If nothing else, it's definitely one of the better cooperative 2-player games on the Super Nintendo, which the service definitely lacks pretty hard if you ask me. It's not impossible that the game is never going to end up being re-released someday, but I'd bet a copy of Jurassic Park on VHS that it's never going to end up on the service if it does. Number 2. Rock and Roll Racing. Are you guys ready to rock? Oh. Well, okay then. Number 1. Atlas RPGs. Like I said earlier, Square's got plenty of great games that never made it to the West, and they may have been way better than Atlas back in those times, but English readers did eventually get all of Square's best Super Nintendo games, whereas most of Atlas's work on the console never officially left Japan. At the time of this recording, I've only played the first Shin Megami Tensei game, but from the looks of it, it looks like we missed out on a lot of stuff that looks pretty, well, weird, but in a good way. And since Nintendo never misses an upload from this channel, I'm hoping that putting it in number 1 increases the chances of them disproving me. But unfortunately though, the odds are probably only going to go from a 0% chance to like a 0.1% chance. And that's mainly because the only official English translations for these games that exist were done by random fans in their spare time for free. I mean, don't get me wrong, they did a great job, and I do thank them for that, but like I said earlier about Clock Tower, companies could be babies about using fan translations, and I think that's pretty lame. I mean, it's pretty much like somebody said,
Hey Atlas, how about you hook us up with Hong Kong 97?
well, sorry, bud, we don't want to go through the trouble of translating it.
Oh, well, Jimmy over here already translated the game, man. He said you could just use his version.
Well, we don't want to use somebody else's work, we'd rather just do it ourselves.
Oh, well, okay, so you'll translate it yourselves?
Well, no, because we really don't feel like doing it.
God damn it, just let us give you free money so we could play this game through legal means.
Aside from all the translation issues of bringing Atlas RPGs to the Switch's Super Nintendo library, though, there's also assloads of religious references that usually occur within like the first minute of every game, though. Which, in addition to befriending demons, is probably why Atlas games took so long to come to the West in the first place. You know, except for Jack Bros and the Virtual Boy, I guess.
But anyway, that's all for today, though. If you liked this video, then you should check out my video about which 9 NES games are never gonna come to the service. If you'll excuse me, though, I gotta go mow my driveway. Later!
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.